Hello. Hello, and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Great to start the week with you and some of the world's worst people who are featured regularly on corporate TV and who we'll be making fun of today. A lot going on in the world. There's a freak out right now across Europe and the U.S. because Donald Trump is talking about peace with Russia and Ukraine. Imagine that. And so we'll be covering the meltdown that has ensued and a lot more.
It's so funny. There's so many things that people should be freaking out about or, criticizing or mobilizing around against Trump around. And then it's always like the best thing that he does that attracts a lot of opposition. So depressing.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's opposition in media and the Democratic Party really has to rethink their priorities. Like, focusing on him cutting vital government programs, good thing. Freaking out about the possibility, and it's just a possibility, by the way. It remains to be seen whether Trump will actually follow through and end this awful war in Ukraine. But yeah, I just don't think that's really going to resonate with everyday Americans' concerns. Like that, we're not going to keep this war going for another, I don't know, 3 years. We're approaching the 3-year anniversary this week, actually, of Russia's invasion. People want it to continue. Is that? But that's the impression that we'll get today from our friends on corporate TV.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. The media likes war.
And just remember, for madness like today's Monday morning and a whole lot more, go to usefulidiotspodcast.com to support the show and get bonus content, including the Thursday Throwdown, which is your midweek dose of media madness. It's like Monday morning, except it's shorter. And it's the madness of the midweek, not after Sunday.
Right. Yeah. So we really want to make sure we provide you with a lot of coverage, madness coverage.
All right, let's turn to Meet the Depressed.
Good Sunday morning. President Trump's foreign policy is facing its most urgent test of his new term as efforts ramp up to negotiate an end to Russia's war in Ukraine, which is about to enter its 4th year. World leaders gathered at the Munich Security Conference this weekend, where tensions mounted over mixed messaging from the president and his top officials.
You've suggested several things that Ukraine should give up. The idea of NATO membership, territory that was seized back in 2014 by Russia. What should Russia give up?
Russia has gotten themselves into something that I think they wish they didn't.
NATO allies were reportedly blindsided by news of President Trump's call with Vladimir Putin and frustrated that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth appeared to make concessions to Russia.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement.
Hegseth, after a backlash.
You know what's crazy about the backlash over Hegseth saying that is that Joe Biden, after basically provoking a war over Ukraine's membership in NATO, which he refused to take off the table when Russia asked him to, after hundreds of thousands of people got killed as a result, Biden, at the very end of his presidency, said, you know what? Yeah, I don't think Ukraine's ready for NATO anyway. So Pete Hegseth is not really articulating something all that different from Joe Biden. The difference is that Hegseth is willing to make a commitment to it, whereas Biden was just being coy the whole time. He said, we have an open door policy. We're not going to take it off the table. But then when it came time for Ukraine to ask, please let us into Ukraine, he's like, no, you're not ready. So what does that mean? It just means that Biden was using the prospect of the open door to use Ukraine as a backdoor through which NATO could fight Russia and bleed Russia.
Yeah.
And now the Trump administration is talking about putting an end to that.
I mean, I think that Hegseth is a totally odious person. I think it's shameful that he's was confirmed. But I have to say that, echoing what you just said, if anything, Hegseth is being more honest than the Biden administration was being, right? Like they use the possibility of NATO membership, knowing full well they would never do it. So people should actually appreciate this. And also, this whole idea of making concessions to Russia, like all negotiations involve concessions. Both sides have to make concessions. So I don't know why that's a bad thing. And of course, like not giving Ukraine NATO membership would also be sticking to the US's word from the 90s and creating the conditions like needed to potentially, God forbid, end this war.
Yeah, it's really not a big concession if you look at the history. As you mentioned, this was promised to the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War that NATO would not expand further to the east, and then Ukraine itself, in its own declaration of state sovereignty, after it became independent, said we aim to be a neutral state, so therefore not a NATO or a Russian-led military bloc state. And then if you look at Ukrainian public opinion for like most of the last 20 plus years, the majority has been against NATO membership. That only increased after Russia invaded and after the polls were no longer taking into account all the breakaway Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine that like rebelled against the coup that happened in 2014. So Ukrainian public opinion has always been split on this, as has always been recognized. Like, there's documents from WikiLeaks and elsewhere that say that, like, yeah, the internal U.S. government documents that are like, yeah, one problem we have in trying to expand NATO to Ukraine is Ukrainian public opinion. So,
Right.
That's kind of a deterrent. So it's actually not that big of a concession. And again, the question is, do we want to be spending tens of billions of dollars just so we can fuel a proxy war that is killing so many people to determine who gets to rule over eastern Ukraine, where I don't know what the exact numbers are, but there's a lot of people who rebelled against the coup government we helped impose in 2014 and who actually want to be aligned with Russia. So is it worth fueling this ongoing war over what is basically Ukraine's own internal split? And the best thing we can do is to stop fueling Ukraine's own internal division. Imagine that.
Right. Yeah. And you're going to see today, this theme is very present. This theme of equating diplomacy with, capitulation and basically an implicit support and preference for war over peace. And another thing to remember is, had the West not intervened earlier on and blocking a negotiation between, Zelensky and Putin, the Ukraine would have more land than they're now
Absolutely.
going to have. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the question is, will that fact ever get admitted on corporate TV? It's been 3 years of war. I don't think that there's been one mention once on any of these shows that, oh yeah, there was a peace deal reached between these two sides back in April 2022, but we blocked it. No one's
Right.
talked to it. It's like there's like an oath of silence. You just can't acknowledge it, as we're going to see an example of later on today.
Then saying everything is on the table. European leaders worry President Trump is giving leverage to Putin even before peace talks begin and signaling a desire to retreat from Europe. These comments by Vice President Vance at the Munich Security Conference setting off alarm bells.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values.
I sat down exclusively.
So the reaction to Vance's speech is interesting. Now, first of all, I agree with the statement that Vance made that like the threat is not from Russia and China. It is from within because there has been an erosion of values. But Vance and I do not share the same like examples of why that is. So he was talking about cracking down on like far right parties like in Germany, right? And also on free speech in Europe. But what's funny is when he talked about the crackdown on free speech in Europe, he didn't mention what is the most egregious crackdown on free speech, which is the crackdown on Palestinian supporters. We just saw recently Ali Abu Nima being arrested in Zurich before he was supposed to give a lecture about Palestine. And we've seen so many examples of this. And J.D. Vance didn't mention that at all because the Trump administration supports that crackdown on pro-Palestine free speech. Now, he did mention one example, which I think is really funny. We haven't actually covered this on the show. Presidential elections in Romania were recently canceled based on a Russiagate type allegation, where basically Romania all of a sudden claimed that like Russia was interfering with the election via TikTok. And so therefore they had to cancel the entire presidential election. And it turned out, of course, there was no evidence for that, just as there was no evidence for the Russiagate allegations here. But like the Russian interference boogeyman, just as it was used here to such disaster for so long, that was used to literally cancel an election in Romania. And I think that's a good example that is worth bringing up. And he did point to that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And of course, Vance didn't mention and would never mention Ali Abunimah. Other people who may want to mention here, Sarah Wilkinson, Richard Medhurst. These are activists and journalists. And, what's amazing, speaking of German freedom of speech, attacks on freedom of speech, is that a disproportionate number of the people who have been penalized for so-called anti-Semitism are Jewish. So you have Germany telling Jews that they're being anti-Semitic. And what makes them anti-Semitic? The fact that they are protesting for Palestinian rights.
Absolutely. And Richard Medhurst, he was first detained in the UK after flying in from London and had all his devices confiscated. And then he was recently raided in Austria.
In Austria. Sorry, my bad. Yeah.
So, and you've had so many other examples of this. And by the way, Richard Medhurst, despite being harassed and detained, arrested in 2 different countries, the British media totally ignored it. Just whatever. Pro-Palestine journalist having all his devices seized, being detained under terror for questioning under terror laws. Who cares? Who cares? And so does and the same attitude comes from the Trump administration, which lectures Europe about free speech, but does not touch the crackdown on free speech when it comes to Palestine.
Right.
All right. Well, let's hear from Volodymyr Zelensky. Not a good time for him. We're so far away from the days when he was treated as the second coming of Winston Churchill. The corporate media loved him. He was getting a bipartisan standing ovation in Congress. Now he is being abandoned by his chief sponsor in Washington, and he's resorting to his tools that come from his acting career. Before he was president, he was an actor. And so we're seeing those acting skills put to the test now that his chief sponsor in Washington is leaving him hung out to dry. So here he is on Meet the Depressed.
The risk that Russia will occupy Europe is 100%.
If the United States pulls out of NATO, Russia will occupy Europe.
Yes. Oh, not all the Europe. They will begin from those countries, as I said, who are big our friends, but small countries who've been in the USSR and the Soviet Union. They will begin, and we'll see what will be the answer. But Europe will not answer because they don't have. They will begin to defend itself. Each country defend itself, and at this moment, so Russia will get all the successes with all the territories they will want. I don't know, they will want 30% of Europe, 50, I don't know, nobody knows. But they will have this possibility.
So there's a 100% chance, according to Zelensky, that Russia is going to occupy Europe. And then he says, I'm not sure if it's 30% or 50%, but it's some sizable percentage. And this is just so sad. What's really going on? This guy had a peace deal, as we mentioned, with Russia back in the spring of 2022. He listened to Victoria Nuland and Jake Sullivan and Antony Blinken and Joe Biden, who told him not to do it. And in fact, the U.S. refused to back him up by giving him security guarantees to reach that deal. And now he's lost more territory. He's sacrificed hundreds of thousands of people. And so what is he left to resort to? Warning that unless you arm him more, unless you prop him up more, then Russia's going to go on to the rest of Europe. When Russia couldn't even take over most of Ukraine in 3 years of war. How does that make sense? Russia is right there next to Ukraine, but yet so far they've only occupied 20% of it. But somehow after Ukraine, they're going to go and occupy the rest of Europe. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. These are the cries of a desperate person who, rather than listening to his own negotiators who reached a deal with Russia, listened to the Biden administration. And now he's paying the price.
Yes. And did you know, I don't know if people noticed, but Kristen Welker's eyes were like this when he was saying that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if she was shocked because she was shocked that Putin was going to do this and she was scared, or if she was shocked that Zelensky would say something like that. Unclear.
I think she was playing along. I think she was playing like, oh, wow. Oh,
Yeah.
Russia's going to occupy all of Europe. Is Russia going to occupy America too, unless we
Right.
give you nuclear weapons?
That's
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Well, we have a lot more from this interview. Okay, actually, but first though, let's see Trump's reaction, because Trump later on after this interview, Trump was asked about Zelensky's claim that Russia is going to, basically wage war on NATO and occupy Europe. And this is Trump's response.
Sorry, so said today that Russia is going to wage war on NATO. Do you agree with that? Do you have any concerns about?
No, I don't agree. I don't agree. Not even a little bit.
But President
Not even a little
Not even
bit.
a
So
little bit, yeah.
Zelensky's
Right.
intelligence about a Russian occupation of Europe has not convinced, unfortunately, the main audience that he needs to convince, which is Donald J. Trump, his chief sponsor. Okay, so we've seen the fear mongering. If you don't arm me more, then Russia's going to take over the rest of Europe. Let's try flattery. Zelensky is going to try to appeal to Trump's ego, which, you know, to his credit, I think is a good move. That's a good strategy. Let's see how he fares here.
Yes, I said that he's a liar. And he said, I think that my feeling, he said, that he's ready for peace negotiations.
Okay, so what Zelensky's saying there is he's relaying what he says Trump told him. So Trump told him that Trump thinks that Putin's ready for peace negotiations, which is not good for Zelensky because Zelensky doesn't want peace negotiations. Because, by the way, Zelensky's polls are really bad right now. He's polling at like way less than 20%, according to some surveys. And so if there were elections in Ukraine right now, if these polls are accurate, he would not win. And so he needs to delay these peace talks for as long as possible, because as long as Ukraine's at war, he can avoid having elections because he's declared martial law.
I mean, it's a little bit of like the what is it? The Netanyahu factor, right? Where
100%.
I mean, Netanyahu would obviously want to continue killing Palestinians no matter what, but there's an extra incentive for him in that once this war stops, and I don't really call it a war, this genocidal assault stops, he'll be in legal trouble.
Yes, and that's what happens when you're a U.S. client state carrying out acts on behalf of the world's top hegemon, as your own political future becomes tied to their continued fueling of the conflict you're in. And Zelensky and Netanyahu are in the exact same position in that respect. Okay, so let's hear from Zelensky how he's trying to appeal to Trump when Trump says that he thinks that Putin's ready for peace talks.
And I said to him, no, he's a liar. He doesn't want any peace. But I think he's really a little bit scared about the President Trump. And I think the president has this.
Oh, so he's so Putin doesn't really want peace. He's just scared of President Trump. So President, don't listen to Putin when he says he wants peace. He's just scared of you. Because I'm scared of you, because he's scared of you, that means we have to just fight him more and give me more weapons to fight the scaredy cat Putin. He's basically trying like grade school level reverse psychology here, trying to like dupe Trump into thinking that Putin's just scared of him. That's what it's coming down to.
Although, I mean, he's also telling Trump that he's being gullible. But
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. And unfortunately, the problem for Ukraine here is too, Ukraine took the side of the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 when they interfered in the election by leaking fake claims about Paul Manafort, which got Paul Manafort fired. And Trump, I'm sorry to say this, doesn't forget that. And recently it came out that the CIA under John Brennan, who was taking part in framing Trump as a Russian agent on Hillary Clinton's behalf, Brennan used Ukrainian intelligence services to make the allegation that Russia hacked the DNC, which it's easy to forget it now because everyone wants to forget about Russiagate because it's so embarrassing for everyone who bought into it. That was the foundational allegation that we couldn't question for years, that Russia attacked our democracy, stole these emails. And it turns out John Brennan was using Ukraine's intelligence services to help lodge the allegation. So the Trump team doesn't forget that Ukraine was integral to this whole plot to basically frame Trump as a Russian agent and blame his election on Russia. And I think we're going to be seeing Ukraine pay the price for that now. In his first term, Trump played along with neocons in Washington who wanted to use the Russiagate allegations to ramp up war with Russia. It looks like if Trump follows through on his rhetoric now, he's changing his tune on that and going a different course. And that's bad news for Zelensky. Okay. And to underscore that this is not good news for Zelensky, let's hear his thoughts on what would happen if his chief sponsor in Washington no longer provided him with military support.
President Trump said this week he did not say yes when he was asked if he sees Ukraine as an equal member in the peace process. He did say later that Ukraine would have a seat at the table. Have you been given any assurances that Ukraine will have an equal seat at the negotiating table?
So I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. Never. And our people, never. And our adults and children and everybody. It can't be so. This is the war in Ukraine against us, and it's our human losses. And we are thankful for all the support, unity between USA, in USA, around Ukraine support, bipartisan unity, bipartisan support. We're thankful for all of this, but there is no any leader in the world who can really make a deal with Putin without us, about us.
Okay, my bad. I introduced the wrong clip. This clip, so he's saying that we're not going to accept any deal reached between the U.S. and Russia, Ukraine. But that's the problem here. It doesn't matter. He's not like the fact that Trump called Putin first, and now Russian and U.S. negotiators are meeting directly in Saudi Arabia for the first time. It just underscores that Zelensky and Ukraine, they're not the main players here. And despite hearing for so long about nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, the policy all along has been to use Ukraine. And now that Trump is changing the policy, it doesn't matter what Ukraine says. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you let yourself be used as a tool to bleed Russia. Biden never cared about defending Ukraine. He cared about using it to bleed Russia. Everyone admits this now. It's very openly stated. So whether he accepts a deal or not, it doesn't matter, unfortunately, for him.
Yeah, and I mean, it's nice that he's saying, no, nothing without Ukraine. And we're not going to be dictated by outside forces. But if he really respected the sovereignty and the will of Ukrainians, he'd be pursuing a negotiated settlement to the war, because I referred to this, how unpopular he is. But according to a Gallup poll from November 2024, 52% of Ukrainians want a quick negotiated end to the war. So again, if he was respecting the autonomy of Ukrainians, he'd be pursuing that. And we know there have been these disgusting videos. Of course, we don't see them on Western corporate media, but of these conscription squads, literally abducting Ukrainian men and forcing them to fight. They're really brutal.
It's such a tragedy.
It really is.
All this carnage for what? For what?
Yeah.
It's just and again, just compare it the climate now in the US, where now there's an open talk about peace, and some people are freaking out about it, but compared to 3 years ago when it was so jingoistic, when shows like ours that were like, hey, maybe we should try diplomacy with Russia and try to address some of the rather than adopting this caricature of Russia and Putin as the new Hitler, they look at the context. There was a coup in 2014. There's something called the Minsk Accords. We need a little bit of time just to provide some context, which nobody else could provide. Now, of course, this is always what happens. During a time of war, everybody rallies around the flag. And then once the damage is done, everybody dies and the truth comes out a little bit more. Now everyone kind of backs off a little bit. And it's just a sad, sad illustration of how propaganda works, even in a very free society where there's no government censor telling us what to say. But everybody, with the exception of You Still Idiots, I got to say, and a few other shows, fell in line. And it's tragic. It's really, really tragic.
It really is. And people, Putinists, if we're Putin puppets, fine. So is Boris Johnson, who called this a proxy war.
He recently did. He's like, this is a proxy war. We're not arming our
And he should know, since he intervened on behalf of the West and blocked negotiations.
Let me show a recent example of how now everybody admits that we never cared about Ukraine and we're just using it to bleed Russia. Okay, this is David Ignatius, columnist of the Washington Post, very close to intelligence officials and the Biden administration. He's essentially a spokesperson for the intelligence community. Very good sources inside the government. This is what he recently wrote about Jake Sullivan's strategy inside Ukraine. Jake Sullivan being the national security advisor under Joe Biden. This is what David Ignatius said. It was a sensible, cold-blooded strategy for the United States to attrit an adversary at low cost to America while Ukraine was paying the butcher's bill. Okay? And butcher's bill, that's a battlefield term meaning heavy casualties. You're taking heavy casualties. So it was so look at that line. It was a sensible, cold-blooded strategy. So that right there, it's so basically, according to this columnist, it's sensible for the U.S. to be sociopaths, to be cold-blooded, to sacrifice Ukraine and let Ukraine pay the butcher's bill for our strategy of bleeding Russia. And that's openly admitted that was the strategy all along, but yet everyone rallied behind these lies. This is about defending democracy and stopping authoritarianism. It was all just jargon. And by the way, even Biden, when he said after all the damage was done that Ukraine isn't ready to join NATO, one of the things he said was, yeah, like Ukraine, they have problems with corruption and they're not really quite democratic yet. So we're going to wage a proxy war to defend democracy, but then the country that we're defending, in fact, isn't even that democratic, according to Joe Biden.
So it's so ridiculous. It's just such blatant using of Ukraine, weaponization.
All right, let's hear from the Trump administration. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, he is among the officials who Trump has tapped to go to Saudi Arabia. It's actually happening right now as we're speaking, to meet with Russian counterparts. He's there. Keith Kellogg, who was Trump's envoy for Ukraine, is not there, which is kind of funny. So basically, Keith Kellogg was like supposed to be the guy, the point man, but he's already been sidelined. And so Mike Waltz appeared on Fox News to discuss his administration's strategy when it comes to ending this war.
War to an end.
Okay, so there are talks about, talks starting this week. You are reportedly part of that team that's going to be in Saudi Arabia talking with the Russians, but there are questions about Ukraine's role. Here's what Senator Adam Schiff says. The president's inability to even identify Ukraine as an equal bargaining power, after all the blood Ukraine has shed, it's just a shocking surrender of American values and interests. Now, President Zelensky says he's not going to be bound by any deal that's negotiated between Russia and the U.S. Are the Ukrainians going to have a seat at the table for those talks this week?
Well, what Secretary Besson, our Secretary of Treasury, was talking to Zelensky about, and then follow on with talks with Secretary Rubio and the Vice President, was entering into a partnership with the United States. We're talking about growing the pie for the Ukrainian economy, and I can't think of any better security guarantee than being co-invested with President Trump, with the American people going forward. And having those investments as a protection in of itself, number one. But number two, the American people deserve to be recouped, deserve to have some type of payback for the billions that they have invested in this war. And then further, Shannon.
All right. So what he's talking about here, and this is just so sad. After Ukraine, under U.S. orders, sacrifices itself, hundreds of thousands of people, now the Trump administration is coming in and saying, you know what? You got to pay us back for all the money we put in. So we want you to sign this deal, handing us control of half of your mineral resources. Half.
Your rare earths.
Of your rare earths, as Trump put it. And amazingly, the U.S. isn't even offering Ukraine anything in return. Zelensky had actually proposed this. He was like, basically, hey, we'll sell ourselves out further and give you half of our mineral resources if you give us security guarantees and more military assistance. The Trump administration is saying, yeah, we're not going to give you that. We want you to give us your mineral reserves, not in return for anything, but we're just as payback for what we gave you. That's what Waltz just said there. So on top of sacrificing itself, now Ukraine has to suffer the indignity of being told by Trump, yeah, just give us half of your rare earth minerals as payback, and we're not offering you anything in return. And Zelensky, to his credit, hasn't signed that deal. Because, I mean, like, why would he? Just it's essentially a hostage situation, but he's asking for security guarantees in return, and it doesn't look like the Trump administration is going to provide it.
So gross. It's so terrible. Yeah.
Okay, we can move on to.
I just wanted to say one thing before we move on. Shout out, by the way, to Adam Schiff, who posted about over 124 journalists killed. Of those 124 journalists, a vast, and this is just within a year, over 70 were killed by Israel, probably way more than that. But it's just amazing that he, of course, doesn't mention that one of our great allies, friends, and with whom we share values, was the one doing the killing. Just disgusting. All righty.
Adam Schiff. I mean, very, not very rare we ever speak about him in a positive context on the show. I'm hoping he can contribute something that we can applaud one day, just to balance things out. his batting
Yeah.
average on useful dates is pretty low. Okay.
Yeah, we're not picking on you, Adam. It's just that you are terrible.
Yeah. I mean, he did make an appearance there in the Fox News segment because, like, he's a neocon, so Fox News is going to use
Right.
him to, like, trot out the neocon point of view. So credit to him for making on Fox News in a favorable way. That shows that he's willing to work across the aisle. But yeah.
To do terrible things. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's turn to Marco Rubio. He appeared on Face the Nation.
He was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the...
No, we don't want this one yet.
Although it's
We
a
want
good
the
one.
we want
What number is it?
we want the one before that about peace talks.
This administration did have contact through the intelligence agencies with Russia, but they didn't believe there was any proof that Vladimir Putin was interested in talks. You know the history with Vladimir Putin. He likes to use diplomacy as a cover to distract while he continues to wage war.
What is Margaret like Brennan all of a sudden a Sovietologist, like an expert in Putin's negotiation tactics? I mean, this is someone who doesn't even want any negotiation to happen, but she says that with such confidence and it's such a subjective assessment.
This is a classic example of where the media is allowed to be adversarial toward
Right.
our leaders is when they're engaging in diplomacy. And so she can trot out this like juvenile, baseless like declaration about Putin. It's like, you know, Putin, he likes to use diplomacy as a tool for more war. When actually, again, the problem is she can get away with saying that, I guess, on corporate TV because she refuses to mention that Putin's negotiators reached a deal with Ukraine,
Right, of course.
you know, nearly 3 years ago, which the U.S. blocked. So it's actually the U.S. that has always blocked diplomacy, or often blocks diplomacy when it undermines their war aims. And of course, because the show has probably never covered those talks seriously and mentioned that the U.S. opposed and undermined them, she can get away with saying stuff like that. But it's ridiculous. And it shows how, like, that's when the media gets adversarial, is when there's a chance of peace.
Right. And Aaron, remember you joked about people being like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Saying with sanctions, like, are we going to impose sanctions yet? Are we going to? That was Margaret Brennan who inspired that.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But again, she's interviewing a diplomat, Marco Rubio. He's the Secretary of State. And she's basically haranguing him for engaging in diplomacy. Like, how dare you, sir? How dare you? And like, you know, Putin doesn't want. And again, she says, like, you know, the Biden administration assessed that Putin doesn't want diplomacy. This is after the Biden administration undermined Putin's best attempt at diplomacy when they blocked the peace deal that Putin's negotiators reached with Ukraine. It's so Orwellian. It's so Orwellian.
Really
it's so embarrassing.
And you know, sorry. Well, Brennan is actually, I mean, this is a low bar and I'm damning her with faint praise, but she, when it comes to Palestine, is a lot better than the other ones. But it's kind of an example of this is a next level of propaganda that people have to see through. And a lot of people who are seeing through the propaganda when it comes to Israel, and it's a great thing, don't really get to the next level, which is seeing through the propaganda when it comes to Ukraine and Russia.
It's strange. It's like, if you're decent on the moral question of our time, the genocide in Gaza, then you have to balance that out by being like a demented war hawk and everything else. I guess that's the rule. And we're gonna hear more doozies from Margaret Brennan shortly after this one. But let's go back to Marco Rubio's answer.
You trust that this time is different.
Yeah, I don't think in geopolitics anyone should trust anyone. I think these things have to be verified through actions. I said yesterday that peace is not a noun, it's a verb, it's an action. You have to take concrete steps towards it. What I can tell you is,
I like that. That sounds so like progressive. Peace is not a noun, it's an action.
Yeah.
That reminds me of, it's a verb. It's a verb. Yeah, that reminds me of there's a thing, people say that about solidarity. Solidarity is not a noun, it's a verb. But that usually comes from like progressive. So shout out to Rubio for attending some, I don't know, like kumbaya drum circles.
I'll look out for Marco Rubio at your next DSA meeting.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know
of no better negotiator in America.
He's going to get up in the middle of the, okay, hey, everyone. Hey, yeah, this is Marco. I just want to say, peace is not a noun, it's a verb. Okay. And then, everyone's going to like give like the waving fingers. Yeah. The snapping
Yeah.
fingers. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And he's going to be like, Marco Rubio, he, him.
Yeah. But again, here he is telling a journalist that actually, diplomacy is not a bad idea. Let's try that. Marco Rubio, career war hawk,
So scary.
has to tell a journalist that actually diplomacy is not a bad idea. It's weird out there. It's really weird. Okay, we can go on to the next clip. Margaret Brennan did not handle herself very well in this clip. She got a lot of flack for what she said, and I think deservedly so. Listen to her trying to criticize J.D. Vance for his comments at the Munich Security Conference in Germany.
He was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views.
Okay, so what she just said there was that J.D. Vance, in trying to lecture Europe about free speech, that was inappropriate because doing so in Germany means he was, lecturing about free speech in a country where free speech caused the Nazi Holocaust. That's what she was saying there.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Which is not true. I mean, it's not true at all. I mean, the Nazis were not big fans of free speech, obviously. And I don't know what the connection is between free speech and the extermination of tens of millions of people by the Nazis, but that's the link that she's trying to draw there.
Yeah.
And again, Marco Rubio is going to have to correct her.
And we'll go. Yeah, let's play it, and then I'll come back to this point.
Some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that.
So she's talking about the AfD, the right-wing Nazi light party in Germany, which is true, but that's not about censorship per se.
Was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship
I have to disagree with
was
you.
specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no.
Okay, again, more proof that Rubio's been hanging out with leftists. I mean, he does say it's primarily Jews, but he acknowledges that it was other groups. He doesn't say this, but of course, Roma, people with disabilities, LGBTQIA people, communists. So shout out to Rubio for taking an intersectional view of the Holocaust.
Really humiliating for Margaret Brennan, and she was widely mocked for that statement. And it's really just silly to claim that free speech helped cause the Holocaust. It just doesn't make any sense. And one other problem with all this is sure, J.D. Vance obviously has sympathies with AfD and other far-right parties, and people are critical of J.D. Vance for, whitewashing their extremist views and saying, how can you engage with a party that is normalized, Nazism? Well, all of you have normalized Nazism by arming and whitewashing neo-Nazi militias inside Ukraine,
right.
Who have been like the shock troops for this proxy war going back many years, not just since Russia's invasion, but since the 2014 coup. It was far-right neo-Nazi elements that were major drivers of the coup that the U.S. supported in Ukraine in 2014. And then in the ensuing war that broke out in the Donbass, it was groups like the Azov Battalion and neo-Nazi militia that were on the front lines on the side of U.S. forces. A year before the 2014 coup, the European Parliament had put out a statement saying that nobody should associate or have anything to do with this Ukrainian party Svoboda because of their anti-Semitic xenophobic views. And what happened 1 year later? John McCain, Victoria Nuland, Chris Murphy were cavorting around Kyiv with the head of Svoboda because he was integral to their plans for regime change. So this whole thing about being upset about Vance and normalizing Nazis, fair enough, but it's completely hypocritical given who the U.S. and NATO have sided with inside of Ukraine.
Right. Well, as we pointed out before, obviously Azov and Svoboda have read Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, and they're no longer racist Nazis.
Yeah.
But I was trying to think about what Brennan was referring to. So I think maybe, and I'm not sure, but so Nazi newspapers were shut down. Nazi members, prominent Nazi members, were jailed, and Hitler was banned from speaking in the 1920s, right? So that is true. under the Weimar Republic. And I'm going to quote FIRE, which is that organization for free speech, which is often right-wing, but sometimes it's principled. The Nazis used the attempts to suppress their speech as public relations coups. The party waved the ban like a bloody shirt to claim they were being targeted for exposing the international conspiracy to suppress true Germans. As one poster explained, why is Adolf Hitler not allowed to speak? Because he is ruthless in uncovering the rulers of the German economy, the International Bank, Jews and their lackeys, the Democrats, Marxists, Jesuits, and Freemasons, because he wants to free the workers from the domination of big money. And then the irony in this is that, if anything, this is an argument for why there shouldn't be censorship, because this is an example of how the Nazis weaponized not free speech. They weaponized the suppression of free speech. They weaponized censorship against them. And in 2021, Trump tweeted, it's been deleted, but he did tweet, Twitter employees have coordinated with the Democrats and the radical left in removing my account from their platform to silence me. And you, the 100,000 great patriots who voted for me. So again, the irony is that, if anything, if Brennan wants to point to this historic example, the takeaway is the opposite.
Absolutely. And she's been rightfully mocked for her comments.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn to Congressmember Dan Crenshaw. He's a Republican, and he's like one of these, Ukraine proxy war tough guys. He's a hawk, and so it's a little awkward for him right now that, like, his president Trump, who he's down with, and he's on the same side of, is now talking about peace. So how is like a tough guy MAGA, pro proxy war guy going to handle the fact that Trump is now apparently, and again, we have to qualify that because you never know with Trump. This all just could be for naught. He could just continue the same policy for all we know. Like, you never know with him. But how is Dan Crenshaw handling the fact that Trump is talking about peace with Russia? Well, Crenshaw is going to blame the Europeans. He's going to take it out on the Europeans.
Understand that he has asked not just for continued military support now, but security assurances in the event of a peace deal. What can you tell him about what to expect from America?
I just came from a lunch where General Kellogg spoke. He's a special envoy leading this effort to establish peace, and he's very clear.
He's actually not, by the way. Kellogg's been totally sidelined, as you can see from the fact that, as we mentioned earlier, he's not even going to be there in Saudi Arabia when Mike Waltz and Rubio sit down with Russian counterparts. So anyway.
Clear that what the kind of peace we're talking about is a lasting peace, which of course involves security assurances. And part of that process is figuring out exactly what that means. Even the Ukrainians are talking about what that means. There's a variety of options, per se. I think the Europeans have to play a huge role in that. One of the things that gets talked about a lot is, what are European forces actually acting as a peacekeeping force? The Ukrainians clearly have a seat at the table, and the United States will be the intermediary as we try to establish a peace deal. But the Europeans need to demand a seat at the table by being uncomfortably aggressive, which is something they haven't done. You should be threatening things to Putin that actually make you uncomfortable, because that's the only language Putin speaks, is power. And when General Kellogg is at that table with Putin, he's only got a finite amount of leverage. And there's only so much more leverage that the U.S. can impose. And if anybody can do it, I think it's Donald Trump. And he's already said that nothing is off the table. Vice President Vance said that nothing is off the table. Economic, military, they will use the amount of leverage they can. My message to European leaders is, if we want to win, if we want a better outcome for Ukraine at the end of these peace talks, you need to be uncomfortably aggressive. You need to not just bolster your own defense spending, because that's a long-term issue. That's a long-term investment. Yeah. You need to be talking about where you're going to be putting actual troops on the ground. Stop following our lead and actually take the lead. Let us be actually holding you back.
Hold me back, hold me back, hold me back. That's what he wants Europe to be doing. Like, he wants Europe to be like the guy in the bar who's like going after someone else. It's like, hold me back, because I'm out of control. I'm wild. I'm about to go wild. This is so funny.
About to break a beer bottle over someone's head. Yeah,
exactly. What he's dealing with here is the is just the disappointment he feels that Trump is not being a tough guy. Trump is not threatening Russia. Trump is talking about peace with Russia, but he can't criticize Trump because he's a MAGA guy. So instead, he's taking out his frustrations on Europe. He's saying, "Why aren't you being the tough guy? Where's the toughness? Why aren't you saying hold me back? Why aren't you being uncomfortably aggressive?" Like,
yeah, what is this uncomfortable aggression? It sounds like a weird, like, personal development thing, doesn't he? He sounds like some weird guru in, like, spiritual practices. It's so weird. And of course, this is all to just hide that he wants them to spend more money on NATO.
He's trying to be like a male influencer, but only directed for European audiences. He's like, this is not applied to MAGA.
Right.
This is only for European men. Okay, you got to be uncomfortably aggressive towards Russians. You got to say, "Hold me back." You got to threaten them. It's so funny.
It's so funny. It's like,
funny.
Martin Luther King once said, like, something like, if you're comfortable in your coalition, it's not big enough. So there, once again, you got these people doing callbacks to the left. Obviously, he's not doing that, but it did make me think of that. Yeah,
I'd love to see her like Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister. Like, hold me back, hold me back, or I'm going to deploy His Majesty's troops into the battlefield of Ukraine. Hold me back. Yes, that's what he wants to see. That's what he wants to see. Oh man, that's a good one. Okay, here's another.
Like they're in a relationship or something. I feel like he's like complaining about to someone. It's like something you would say to a partner. Like, I really need you to be, like, more assertive. I'm tired of being uncomfortably aggressive. UA.
Yeah, UA, uncomfortably aggressive. All right. Well, here's another Republican coping with the fact that Trump is not being the MAGA tough guy that everyone wants to be. Mark Wayne Mullin is senator of Oklahoma.
Oh, this guy's great.
He's just basically inventing it, by the sounds of it, like that a strategy that Trump doesn't actually have. That Trump is actually really still threatening the military force that people like him want to be threatening Russia against, even though there's no evidence for that. But here's Mark Wayne Mullin coping with Trump calling for peace.
President Trump poised to actually really turn the screws on Putin?
Absolutely, because Putin knows the one person that can truly change the war is the United States. If we went all in for Ukraine, if we went all in with the resources we have, from air superiority to the weapons that we can deploy to Ukraine, Putin knows at that point he would be in a extremely negative position. I think that being the opportunity for President Trump to talk to Putin and say, listen, we want to end the war. We don't want to have to engage more, but we're not going to allow you to move forward. So let's negotiate a peace deal here, or you're going to force our hand to be farther involved. That's what peace through strength is. It's negotiating peace, but using strength as a backup. If you make us do something, we will do it. We did this in Syria when President Trump was in office in 2017.
Again, he and Crenshaw are really into, like, using pop psychology to encourage political actions. It's great. They should go on tour and give workshops about it. Like uncomfortably aggressive, peace through strength, which is, but yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. You saw that. Putin went ahead and engaged with Syria. They used chemical weapons. Immediately, what President Trump did is he bombed the airport and took over the airspace that Russia was control over, and he had control of the airspace for the remainder of his presidency. So we had the ability to do it, and Putin knows that.
All right, well, again, just a correction on the chemical weapons thing. We know from OPCW whistleblowers, leaked documents, that allegation has been seriously undermined. But putting that aside, this is more coping, where the senator here is basically ascribing to Trump a policy that he's never espoused, that Trump is threatening like our air power to like put pressure on Russia. Like, what's he talking about? This is the pro-war wing of MAGA coping with the fact that Trump is talking about peace when he's never threatened to go more into war. In fact, Pete Hegseth said this week that U.S. troops will not be deployed, that we're not going to give Ukraine security guarantees, and that Ukraine will not be in NATO. So in fact, actually, there's no sort of bullying from a pro-war perspective at all happening with Trump. Maybe Trump will turn around, do a U-turn, as he's prone to do sometimes and do that. But that's not what's happening right now. What's happening right now is people like Mark Wayne Mullin and Dan Crenshaw are coping with the fact that Trump is talking about peace.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing. Is it? Well, let's keep playing the rest of that.
Well, that's it for
Oh,
for him.
where's the? Oh, we don't have the one. Did he mention the how it's going to hurt people's pocketbooks? Did we cut that one?
We're gonna get to that later on.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
we're
got it.
gonna get to that later on. Yeah, because we'll be talking about Elon Musk going
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Cutting the workforce. But
Right.
let's turn now also to the other major hotspot, the ceasefire deal that Trump almost blew up when he basically all of a sudden invented a new condition on Hamas, saying that Hamas has to release all the captives by Saturday, or else, what did he say? Like, or else,
Hell will break loose.
hell will break loose, as if
Yeah,
hell
or
already hasn't
yeah.
broken loose in
Right.
Gaza, the target of a genocide. But Israel kind of ignored Trump's statement, at least for now, and has actually allowed in more humanitarian aid because it was blocking that aid, as Israeli officials even admitted. And so over the weekend, more captives were freed. And here is U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff to discuss.
Who sounds so much
What
like
I
a real
saw
estate
there
developer.
was alarming. It
He's talking about being in the region, in Gaza.
it's completely devastated, and that begs the question: should people be allowed in there in those sorts of dangerous conditions? Thank God we've had no incidents, but there's 30,000 unexploded shells throughout Gaza, and the buildings are all down. It's utter destruction. There's all kinds of issues. This affects, by the way, phase 3, which is the theoretical reconstruction of Gaza. We're going to have to get to a reconstruction, but the devil will be in the details on the master plan, on how we examine everything subterranean, which has been blown up. So lots of issues with that. With all of that said, I also saw a film of what happened on October 7th, and that was a horrific film. So I've got some context, and that was important for me to have.
I love the way he's framing this as, first of all, like a public safety, public health issue. A lot of destruction. Is it safe to be there? Doesn't mention. Speaking of context, it would be nice if he actually mentioned who was responsible for this destruction. And I'm glad he feels like he has context about October 7th. But it'd be interesting if he mentioned, God forbid he wouldn't, God forbid he would, Israel's role in killing people on October 7th, or Israel's role in creating the conditions for October 7th.
Yeah, heaven
But he
forbid.
watched that propaganda film, yeah.
On the one hand, I saw a death camp being destroyed with U.S. bombs. On the other hand, I saw a propaganda video made by Israel. So,
Yeah. So,
like,
yeah, I have the
and
context.
and what's he talking about? The theoretical reconstruction of Gaza. Like, it has to be rebuilt. I mean, like, what's theoretical about it?
Right.
And
Yes.
listen, it is true that people can't live there right now. People will have to live somewhere else because it's been so destroyed by U.S. bombs with U.S. support by Israel. But the solution that Trump is talking about is ethnically cleansing, basically forcing them to go somewhere else and never coming back.
Permanently,
No,
right.
no one ever says, let's let them go back to their homes inside what is now Israel, from which Palestinians in Gaza were expelled in 1948 and in years since. Most of Gaza are refugees. Most of Gaza are either are refugees or the descendants of refugees who still have the titles to their homes in what is now Israel. And if Israel won't let them go back there, because Israel is a Jewish supremacist state, so it doesn't want to let Palestinians live in their own land. Why can't Palestinians go live in the West Bank, which is Palestinian territory, and kick out the illegal Jewish settlers that live there? That's never on the table either. So the Trump administration is trying to get people to buy into ethnic cleansing, but the countries of the region, don't want to be responsible for the fact that Israel is a Jewish supremacist state that expels people. And second of all, Palestinians have rights. They have rights to live in their own land. And the Trump administration is trying to find a solution that completely undermines that.
Right. Yeah. And once again, we see this pattern where the destruction in Gaza is presented like there's no agency, no one's responsible for it. It almost has like a natural disaster sound to it.
Yeah,
Because there's
exactly.
no blame assigned to any individuals. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have more from this this clip.
And of course, President Trump has put once again maximum pressure on Iran. What is the situation in terms of Iran, and how can you make a dent in stopping Iran from supporting these proxies like Hamas?
Well, that's the ultimate question, Maria, and that's what we've got to answer. All roads lead to Iran or Iran in this.
I like the way he does both pronunciations. He wants to cover all bases. All roads lead to Iran or Iran.
For Iran, I'm going to say that that pronunciation out of respect for the Fox News audience who says Iran, and then I'm going to actually then say the proper name.
Right, closer to the proper name. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In this Middle Eastern conflict, what happened? The Houthis, the Hezbollah, Hamas.
The Houthis and the Blowfish. Yeah.
Hamas, they're all sponsored by Iran, and Iran is the benefactor. But of course, the largest issue is the nuclear, and the president has said they will not get a bomb. Them getting a bomb is devastating to the region.
Interesting again that he was the one who walked away from the nuclear deal with Iran. Never really makes a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. They had a deal. Iran got closer to a nuclear weapon because Trump walked away from the deal, and that's obviously not going to get pointed out on Fox News.
Right. Or actually, even it doesn't. Does it even? I don't even know if it gets pointed out on like MSNBC or on liberal news, but we'll check it out.
It will force every other country in that region to get a bomb too. We'll have a nuclear arms race, and that simply can't happen. But the president has also said this can be solved diplomatically. And if Iran shows an interest in solving it diplomatically, the American government remains open to those discussions. And so I hope that it can be solved diplomatically, because the alternative is not such a good alternative.
No, okay, that's a nice way to describe the apocalypse. Not such a good alternative. Fair enough. But yeah, look, Iran has talked about making a new deal. The president of Iran, when he last visited New York for the General Assembly, talked about that. I mean, that's certainly on the table if the U.S. wants to seriously engage with that. And of course, one thing that is not mentioned here in this, fear mongering about nuclear weapons in the Middle East, there's a state that already has nuclear weapons.
Exactly.
Israel. And of course, they never acknowledge that. And Iran has joined other countries in the region, in fact, most of the world, in proposing a nuclear-free Middle East zone, which would have ensured that nobody would have nuclear weapons. But of course, the U.S. and Israel blocked that at every turn because they insist that Israel should have nuclear weapons with which it can threaten everybody else.
Right. But that always gets omitted, yeah. Well, we have more Mike Waltz, right?
Well, we can actually skip ahead to
10?
Oh, actually, yes.
Oh.
Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, he spoke again to Fox News also about the Middle East.
Okay, so I want to get to Israel. Iran, obviously, the continued instigator in a lot of what comes to the shores of the people of Israel.
Obviously, Iran on everything. Yeah. It's not Israel carrying out one of the longest military occupations in the world, ethnic cleansing, genocide. Yeah, no, it's Iran. It's just Iran. Yeah.
Just I mean, the use of that term instigator as if it's an an obvious, undeniable thing is just amazing. The assignment of blame to Iran and total exoneration of Israel.
The level of racism toward Palestinians is just it's incomprehensible. The fact that you can these people know that Palestinians are occupied. They've had their land stolen from them. They've been dehumanized. They've suffered so many atrocities going back decades and decades and decades, including just recently an ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing campaign. And yet they can still sit there and say, even though they know the Palestinians are denied their basic right to self-determination, which everybody has, that it's Iran that's behind everything, not the denial of Palestinians' most basic rights, and not the fact that Palestinians are subjected to some of the worst crimes in human history. It's all just Iran's fault. I mean, that takes a level of racist contempt that is on par with the way the Nazis saw the Jews. Honestly, it's very similar. It's just completely erasing their their humanity. And we see that now. Look at the images coming out of the Palestinian prisoners being released from Israeli torture dungeons, emaciated. Some people have had their limbs amputated,
So
talking
disgusting.
about being experimented on in really sadistic ways. And the media just totally totally yawns.
Yeah, and I mean, it was last week, I believe, right, that Marta Raddatz talked about how gaunt an Israeli prisoner was, and as we pointed out, well, there's no food in Gaza, so the fact that they aren't all starving and totally emaciated is pretty impressive, and the fact that all these Palestinian prisoners are emaciated, there's literally no justification for that, except for Israel's decision to starve them.
Exactly. And Trump was complaining that the Israeli prisoners who were released, some of them looked like Holocaust survivors.
Right.
This week, the Israeli prisoners who were released actually looked a lot better. And he didn't make the connection between these Israelis looking gaunt and the fact that Israel cut off all
Right.
food and aid into the areas in which these Israelis were being detained. And of course, Trump had nothing to say, just like Martha Raddatz, about the Palestinian prisoners who were released, where Israel does not have the excuse of being under a criminal blockade and siege and genocide.
Yeah. And they are much more like across the board
Yes,
starved than the Israeli prisoners.
100%.
Hostages, yeah.
President Trump told Bret Baier a few days back, he says he'd love to make a deal without bombing them. But that stands in contrast to this report coming from the Washington Post, says Israel is likely to bomb Iranian nuclear facilities in the next few months. It goes on to say that part of this is based on U.S. intel. It says the military intelligence report in the Washington Post spelled out 2 potential strike options, each involving the U.S. providing support in the form of aerial refueling, as well as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, said those familiar with the document. So there are disagreements about how much a strike could do to actually set this program back, whether it's weeks, months, years. But it would certainly increase tensions in that region. What would the U.S. involvement be in a strike? Can you speak to that report of the Washington Post?
Shannon, I could speak to what the president has repeatedly said, and that is Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. That not only would be existential for Israel, I think it would be existential for the entire world, because it could kick off a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. How we get there, I'm not going to get into the details of here.
What has kicked off in our nuclear arms race is the fact that Israel, with U.S. help, has a nuclear weapons program, and states in the region, like Iran, understandably feel threatened because Israel constantly attacks and occupies other people and threatens to bomb them constantly. So in those situations, when you have a nuclear armed state that constantly is the aggressor, you're going to want to develop nuclear weapons to protect yourself. That's
right.
That's the nuclear arms race that we're seeing in the Middle East as a direct result of Israel being the threat to everybody else.
Yeah, and also like the audacity of someone from the U.S. government saying another country can spark a nuclear arms race when we are literally the leading nuclear country in the world.
Yeah, although Trump said this week in a sort of an offhand comment that he wants to reduce the size of the nuclear stockpile in an agreement with Russia and China. I mean, I hope he follows through with that. He probably won't, but if only, that would be a huge gift to humanity if he actually follows through, which, going by his record, he won't, but it's nice to hope.
Yeah.
But the president has also expressed a willingness to take whatever action is necessary. All options are on the table, but also to talk to Iran as well if they want to give up their entire program and not play games as we've seen Iran do in the past in prior negotiations.
That's so flexible of him. He's willing to allow Iran to totally submit, unilateral submission.
Yeah, and also he's willing to do the exact same thing that Iran did last time before Trump killed the deal that was reached.
Right.
So basically, he's willing to do another Iran nuclear deal after Trump killed the first one.
Right. Yeah. And a reminder, Iran had agreed to dismantle much of its nuclear arsenal in the agreement that was ripped apart by Trump's administration.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the update on the Middle East from the Trump administration. At least they're talking about negotiations. At least it's not all entirely just warmongering. I mean, there's so much historical revisionism, but there's like a little sprinkle of diplomacy in there. So let's hope they go with that rather than the traditional warmongering. And let's turn back to Senator Mark Wayne Mullin with thoughts on co-president Elon Musk's effort to basically fire a bunch of federal employees, including this week. His target list included people literally guarding the nuclear weapon stockpile of the U.S. And DOGE was like, oops, yeah, our bad. We didn't realize that they were doing that. But it's not just them. It's people who work in all sorts of different programs, including programs that benefit, low-income children, forests, parks. People are losing their jobs. And let's hear from Senator Mark Wayne Mullin on why he thinks all this is fine and dandy.
So let me turn to what's happening here at home. Do you have any concerns about the speed of the layoffs on Musk's, DOGE efforts?
Well, John, we hate that anybody's losing their job, but at the same time, we know that the debt that we have in this country is not manageable, and it's becoming a national security risk. And we're spending nearly $1 trillion a year just.
How is debt a national security risk, by the way?
Yeah, how is employing a federal government employee who takes care of a local park or provides services for low-income children? How is that a national security risk?
So ridiculous.
Sorry, and how is and so what? The answer is to not guard the nuclear stockpile and fire the workers who are doing that, and that's going to improve national security. Is it maybe a national security risk to fire people who are literally safeguarding the nuclear stockpile?
So ridiculous, yeah. And debt, they love using debt as a political hot potato. The truth is, it doesn't matter at all.
Well, and let's say it does matter. Then if you care about it, then why are you cutting taxes for the wealthy? Why are you reducing government revenues by cutting taxes for the ultra rich, which is what Trump did in his first term and wants to make permanent now? And why are you increasing spending on the Pentagon? When Trump even admitted this week that we spend way too much on it, and we should cut it by 50%. That's what he floated, if only. But that's not the priorities of Senator Mark Wayne Mullin.
Correct.
In servicing the debt. That is scary. We're spending more on interest payments than we are in our Defense Department now. Anybody will tell you that is a road for disaster. So anytime you take over a situation like Elon Musk has had many opportunities and many experiences with taking over businesses, you have to start cutting some of the fat. And unfortunately, the number one expense we have in the United States government right now is payroll. And when you start cutting departments, some people's jobs are lost. And that it hurts us because we don't want anybody to lose their job. But at the same time, we have to get it under control, because if we don't get our debt underneath control, it becomes a national security. Can you imagine?
Okay, so first of all, the top U.S. government expense is not the payroll.
Right. As Carl will point out next. Yeah.
And again, rather than firing people, why don't you stop cutting taxes for the ultra wealthy and stop spending all this money on the military, which everyone knows we don't need. It's a complete waste.
And he's, of course, ultra wealthy.
Of course,
extremely wealthy. Yeah.
Of course
he took over his father's business. Yeah.
If we get downgraded, can you imagine if the dollar starts losing its value, the inflation rate that takes place, and then what happens? Our buying power, the ability for invest into the country, the ability to us to invest in our military starts shrinking, and then we start losing.
That'd be a wonderful thing if you could stop pouring all this unnecessary money into the military. That's the point. And that's the excuse they always use, national security. Well, I mean, how does this help anyone's national security to spend all this money on the military industrial complex? As Trump said, we can blow up the world many times over. Why do we need to do that? I mean, Trump, I have to say, is talking more sense than a senator like this guy. But will Trump actually follow through? I doubt it. But what he's saying here is absolutely complete nonsense.
The strength part when we start wanting to be at the negotiating table from peace through strength.
I think the number one expense is actually entitlements, Social Security and Medicare, which, of course, President Trump has said he doesn't want to touch this. Very quickly.
Don't give him any ideas.
Before you go, should Musk come before Congress? Should Musk come before Congress and testify? He's promised, ultimate transparency here. Should Congress exercise some oversight and have him testify about all of this?
Well, I think that's up to President Trump. Keep in mind, President Trump put in Musk to be a consultant.
Just to correct him more, by the way, he said that paying interest on the debt costs more than the military budget. Not true.
Right.
Also not true. The military budget's like the third or fourth highest expenditure, and interest on the debt is less than that. I mean, Carl was right. The biggest expenditure is so-called entitlements, like Medicare, Social Security. But the Pentagon, which can't even pass an audit, is massive, and no one can explain what it's for.
Right.
Especially when the Pentagon can't even pass an audit.
Yeah, no one. That's never the fat that needs to get trimmed.
Consultant, just like many successful corporations around the world, including myself, that have hired consultants to come in and look at it from an unbiased perspective. When you have politicians that's been in office for 40 years, they a lot of times want to cut everything except their pet project or things that are in their backyard. When you have a consultant come in, which is why companies hire consultants, they look at simply the numbers. And when they do, all that Musk is doing is advising the president based on what he has seen. At the end of the day, it's President Trump's decision on what happens.
I love the idea that it's only politicians, by the way, maybe it's a Freudian slip. He's admitting what he himself does, but it's politicians who have conflicts of interest. It's not someone like Elon Musk.
Yeah, no,
they always take away the corporate corruption. It's only governmental.
This gazillionaire is just a consultant.
Right.
Unbiased, totally
Looking at the
objective.
numbers, yeah.
No interest of his own. Just he's just crunching the numbers.
Yeah.
Rolling up his sleeves, getting to work. Yeah. And again, listen, I'm personally not going to complain about all of Elon Musk's targets. Like, for example, this week or last week, there was an article by Eli Lake, a neoconservative columnist, complaining that the National Endowment for Democracy is like a bloodbath. I think it's wonderful. The National Endowment for Democracy has been a horrible thing for the world. It stabilizes governments around the world, and it propagandizes American taxpayers who foot the bill. So I think it's wonderful that that's being cut. But there are so many things that Elon Musk has unilaterally targeted that is just such an outrage. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which actually saves people money by going after the predatory practices of banks and big corporations. All these people who have lost their jobs, who provide essential services. It's just ridiculous. And I don't see how you can defend it.
And it's so, I mean, this guy's so unconvincing the way he's like, oh, it's unfortunate. We don't want anyone to lose their job, so we need to do it. And also, this is a typical example of like austerity for thee, but not for me. Because listen to this. This guy, Mullin, came out against Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. He himself benefited from $1.4 million in federal PPP loan forgiveness. And Mullin also voted against the Truth Act, which is a bill that would have required public disclosure of companies that received funds through the bailout program.
And what else should we know about Senator Mark Wayne Mullin?
Oh, yeah. Well, I wanted to make sure that people knew that this guy really is a Renaissance man. He's not only a business owner who inherited his father's plumbing company. He's also a mixed martial arts fighter. And he's not afraid to talk about it. So here he is having an interesting interaction with Sean O'Brien, the president of the Teamsters.
Like he's self-made. Sir, I wish he was in the truck with me when I was building my plumbing company myself.
And he's reading Twitter comments that O'Brien had tweeted about him. Okay.
My wife was running the office because I sure remember working pretty hard and long hours. Pretends like he's self-made. What a clown. Fraud. Always has been, always will be. Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me. Any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
First of all, it makes it sound like he's proposing having sex or something. Two consenting adults. Right? All right.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
Is that your solution, everybody?
No, sit down. Sit down. Okay. You're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay. Sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond?
Hold it.
Poor Bernie. Oh,
We can't. No, I have the mic.
said.
I'm sorry.
This is
Hold
what
it.
he said.
You'll have your time.
Okay.
Can I respond?
Oh, no, you can't.
Again,
right.
Dan Crenshaw, going back to what we talked about earlier, Dan Crenshaw should be showing this video to the Europeans as inspiration of what they should be doing towards Russia. Hold me back. Hold me back.
Hold me back. Exactly.
Let's be consenting adults right now and get down.
And get down and lift your butt and get your butt up. Yeah. Well, in case people want to know about what that fight could have looked like, which unfortunately Bernie got in the way of, he cock blocked that fight. Here is Mullin talking during a podcast interview about his fighting style.
Train jujitsu is because even if you lose a fight, you want to make sure the other guy will never want to fight you ever again,
Absolutely.
because it's kind of a win-win at that point. But
Yeah.
we need to move from an almost
And by the
fight.
way, I'm not afraid of biting. I will bite.
Biting?
I'll bite 100%. Yeah. I mean, a fight, I'm going to bite. I'll do anything. I mean, I'm not above it. And I don't care where I bite, by the way. It just is going to be a bite.
I'm not even going to ask any further questions on that. I think that basically speaks for itself.
Again, that's why they need to be, as long as they're consenting adults, and the biting is okay. That's important, though. Yeah. I hope he has a safety word also. Yeah. Anyway, well, that is a great senator. I think that's all. I mean, we've gone over time, right? So we really wanted to make sure you saw that, though. That was an important thing to educate you guys about.
I just hope the Europeans are taking notes.
Yeah.
As they navigate this, new era of potentially the U.S. making peace with Russia. So they have to pick up the slack and follow the lead of Markwayne Mullin,
Yep.
put up hands,
Fight.
throw down.
Don't care where.
Yeah,
Fight all over.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Bite everywhere.
And
All right.
we have some
Yeah.
clips we didn't get to, but when we will get to them,
The
Thursday
Thursday
Throwdown.
Throwdown.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
That's
another
right.
reason you got to do it. And also make sure you check out our recent Substack only extended interviews, because they're both really great. We talked to Michael Tracy on one of them, and then we have a really great one with Brian Berladek, who really sheds a lot of light on the whole NED, USAID, and also has a fascinating story about how he got radicalized by being in the military.
And that's at our website, usefulidiots.podcast.com, where you can
Yeah.
go to support the show and get bonus content. Are there any chats we want to read, or
Oh yeah, let's see. Any well, we want to thank all the people who did super chats. Oh, Aaron, you may be interested in this. Don Zuger is proposing Blumenthal Mate for president, VP 2028. Sounds like you'd be the vice president. I don't know how comfortable you are with that.
Yeah,
I think
no,
maybe
that's a
you
huge
probably want
affront. Yeah, no,
Mate.
I would
Yeah.
never accept second billing. And second of all, also it's an all Jewish ticket, and I don't think America's ready for that. So
Yeah,
sorry.
maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sparky, President Biden had corn pop. President Trump has General Kellogg cornflake. That's actually
Pretty
a good
good.
point, Sparky.
Pretty
Yeah.
good. Pretty good.
And let's see what else. I think those are about it. Again, thanks so much, Sparky, really coming through with a lot of comments there. And someone asked something about, do we want to address whether or not Matt Taibbi gets paid through this? I don't know why someone's but this is no longer. I mean, just so you know, this is Taibbi has blessed this being our show. It's no longer a Taibbi show.
Yeah, Matt has his own podcast now
Yeah.
with Walter Kern. And I was. It's actually been almost 3 years. It's been
Wow, that's
3 years
so crazy.
since
That's so
I took over
crazy.
for Matt, and it's been also coinciding with the outbreak of war in Ukraine. So
Right.
it's been a really fun time.
Perfect
and,
timing. Yeah. What
yeah, no, but thank
coincidence?
you.
We think not.
Yeah, but of course, Matt obviously co-founded the show with Katie, and we try to embody his spirit every single week with the 4 basic food groups, which is
Yeah, that's how
comes
we
from his
recognize
father,
him. Yeah.
his journalist father,
Yeah.
and
His journalist father's friend. Yeah.
his journalist father's friend, right?
Who said that all news, in case people don't know, that comes from all news being able to be divided, in all news stories being able to be divided into 4 categories. Isn't that weird? Isn't that terrible? Democrats suck, Republicans suck. Yeah. Also, I just want to say, if I may, that Tuesday night at 7 p.m. on the Katie Halper Show, I'll be having on John Kiriakou, the great CIA whistleblower, the only person to go to jail over the CIA's torture program. And that's at youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show.
All right. Thanks so much for watching Monday morning. We really appreciate it. Again, our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Please go there to support the show and get bonus content. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.